Welcome to Veteran Voices, a podcast dedicated to giving a voice to those that have served in our country's armed forces. On this series, which is part of the Supply Chain Now family of programming, we sit down with a wide variety of veterans and veteran advocates to gain their insights, perspective, and experiences. We'll talk with many individuals about their challenging transition from active duty to the private sector, and we'll discuss some of the most vital issues facing veterans today. Join us for this episode of Veteran Voices. Hey, good afternoon. Scott Luton with you here on Veteran Voices. Thanks for joining us here today. So on today's show, we've got the opportunity to talk with a veteran that's up to a lot of big things: consulting, writing, speaking, and perhaps most importantly, helping others, which really resonates with me. So stay tuned as we learn a lot more. Hey, on a quick programming note before we get started, if you enjoyed today's episode, you can find us and subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. Simply search for Veteran Voices, and we publish on a weekly basis, targeting every Saturday morning with a new episode with a great veteran or veteran advocate like we have here today. So with no further ado, let's bring in our featured guest here today, Don Edward Long, not only a published author, but founder and president at Long Insights, LLC. Don, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Scott. It's been a very, very long time since you and I have been able to have a dialogue. Of course, it was in the studio, in fact, that we had met when we could still physically meet each other instead of being miles apart. But here we are.
Here we are. But, you know, there are brighter days ahead. Here in Georgia, we've kind of had our work cut out for us and some extra heavy lifting to go, it seems. But, hey, we're going to break through it all. And I really appreciate, as busy as you are, because you've had some big news here in recent weeks, including this week. We'll touch more on that. But I appreciate you carving some time out and really sharing your story. I've enjoyed our collaboration and the opportunity to rub elbows, and really delighted to be able to share the Don Long story with our audience here at Veteran Voices. So, but before we get there, I really want to, on the front end, I really like to dive in with our guests and really kind of get a sense of who they are, where they're from, and their personality and whatnot. So tell us, Don, where are you from?
Well, I came from a small textile town called Bessemer City, not to be confused with Bessemer, Alabama, but Bessemer City, North Carolina. And when I was growing up, again, it was all about textiles. And, you know, along the railroad track, you had all the different various mills, from the mill that took the raw cotton and spun it into threads, and then it would go a little bit farther down the tracks, and the thread would be dyed, and then it would go from there, and then it would be stitched into some kind of material somewhere, and then it would move down the track, and it would be made into clothing or bed sheets or whatever it was. So, you know, you had the whole textile operation, and that's what really kept the town going as I was growing up all those decades ago.
You really paint a nice picture of like textile supply chain in a nutshell. I love that. And you know, we love our supply chain stories around here. The other thing that's really neat, as big as textiles were, kind of especially across the Southeast, you know, NC State and Clemson University, the Textile Bowl, whenever those two teams met on the gridiron and played football. And that was really, those were two well-known schools that sent a lot of talent into the textile industry. When you look back at growing up in Bessemer City, North Carolina, is that right?
That's right. So
what was beyond textiles? What else? What do you look back on growing up in Bessemer City that you really look back fondly and wish more folks had certain experiences?
Oh, it's the small town life. It was one of those where it was a real community where it was safe enough. You didn't have to lock your doors, even at night. Right? I mean, you just wanted to have a little latch on your screen door and leave the door open to let some fresh air in, you could do it. It was that kind of environment. As kids, you know, we weren't restricted to really where we could go. The rule was either you got home before the porch light got turned on, or you went to the hickory bush and got a hickory so you could get your comeuppance for not getting home on time. So, you know, but it was a great environment. It was an environment where if you messed up in the neighborhood parents could whip you, and then they would call your parents and tell you what you did wrong, so your parents would whip you when you got home. So
there's something to be said for clarity, huh? Clarity of your decisions.
So, you know, the structure and discipline we had growing up made the transition or made the move into the military a little bit easier, I will say. You know.
So we're going to talk about your why for joining the military here in just a moment. But what were you in Bessemer City up until you joined the Air Force? How did that work?
Yeah. Right up into high school. Growing up, we weren't poor, but we also learned and developed a work ethic early on. I mean, our parents, again, we never went without, but if we wanted that comic book, if we wanted that, barbecue sandwich, if we wanted that extra malt, something like that, we had to go work for it. So as kids, we would go collect pop bottles for the deposit. We would cut grass. We would rake leaves. We did whatever we had to do to make some extra money and whatnot. So I kind of loved that environment that we had to really develop that work ethic and being responsible and kind of earning our way as we went. So
sounds like it certainly has stuck with you, as you've moved into what you're doing even now.
Yeah. And it has. And I think a lot of what happens with us in our childhood, I think that helps form the dynamic of who we become eventually. I mean, we obviously, it's built upon over time as we get exposed to new environments and new people. And, we have different people that speak into our lives and mentors and whatnot. But there's that foundational piece that I think goes back to your roots of your upbringing and wherever you come from. So.
All right. Good stuff there. Let's talk about what was your why for joining, because you didn't join a different branch. You were in the Air Force throughout your service, right?
Well, yeah, I kind of got off tangent. You're working in a small town, working in textile, and I will say, we did a lot of chores. My father and my grandfather were both roofers, and so I got weaned on roofing real early. And, once you go up there and you have to carry a bundle of shingles up, or you get up there doing some hot mop roofing, when it's 102 degrees outside in the summertime, you think there's got to be a better way to make a living, right? And
it's tough work.
And so I was doing that from about 12 to 16. At 16, I did spend my last year in high school working textile mill, but working textile mill, I saw all these really old guys, and I have to be careful because I have to remember I am an old guy now, right? But I would see these people that just basically lived, worked, and died in the same little town, and I thought, there's got to be something more. So a few weeks after I was thinking that, we had a whole lot of recruiters that came to our high school, and they had their desks set up. They had their tables set up in the gymnasium. So I went one by one, and the Marines, the Army, the Navy, and Air Force looks pretty cool. I love that, man. I love the logo. I love the colors. I love the uniform. It's great. Yep. Put me in, coach. So signed up and delayed, they had the delayed enlistment at the time. So I signed up, and 3 months after graduating high school, after I spent some time with family and friends, took that bus trip down to Lackland Air Force Base, Texas. And that's when life really changed.
Hot San Antonio. When do you remember what time of year did you go through basic?
I went through basic August 2nd, 1977 through September 23rd. I think I got that right. Mid-September of that year, and it was hot. And combination of skunks and hot does not work very well because we had our share of skunks at Lackland as well.
But at least you could get away from hot mopping, which I bet is also extremely hot and hard labor.
Right. And so get away from hot mopping to getting up at 5:30 in the morning, doing calisthenics, running 5 miles, doing all this stuff, thinking maybe the whole small town didn't look so bad after all.
After you graduated from basic and you got through tech school, what was your role in the Air Force? What was your what we call AFSC? We call it, right?
Yeah, mine was a structural repair technician, working airframe, sheet metal work, 10 benders, you name it. They had all kinds of names for us. But, went to Chanute Air Force Base for my technical training. Of course, Chanute's one of those bases that don't exist anymore. It's been converted to some other civilian resource. But I went there, and then I spent my first duty station at Shaw Air Force Base, which wound up being just 126 miles from my hometown.
That's right.
They say enlist and see the world. And it's like, I enlisted and saw South Carolina.
Well, Don, this is interesting because we didn't talk about this in any of our really our dedicated conversations prior. I was from Aiken, South Carolina when I joined the Air Force. And my first duty station was Shaw Air Force Base, which was about an hour and 20 minutes from home, which is unbelievable, right?
Yeah.
So we both served in Sumter, South Carolina. That's really interesting. I didn't realize that about you.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, I think I served quite a bit earlier than you did, Scott. So, we had still F4s and F4s at Shaw Air Force Base when I was there. I think later they converted to F-16s. I'm not quite sure what they've got there now, but it was a great little base. Interesting. You had a lot of different aircraft. It wasn't just F4s. You had the old OV-10 Bronco with 20 millimeter guns. You had the Cessna push-pull, the O2 they called them, the ones that would carry the phosphorus rockets and paint the targets there. Newberry, remember the target range in Newberry?
I think so.
South Carolina?
Yes.
And so they would paint the targets for the F-4s to come in on their strafing runs and all that. So it's really cool to do that maintenance and see all these aircraft and how that interacted, right? How all these support aircraft worked together. So.
Yeah, I don't know about you. I miss seeing the aircraft. And where we live in Atlanta, we see, of course, Hartsfield-Jackson traffic, non-military traffic. But every so often, we get over on the Marietta side, and you see all the naval, you see different military traffic there. But what I enjoy, Don, is when I'm maybe headed to Charleston or maybe headed up through Charlotte, and every so often, you'll see a couple F-16s that probably hit the range, they're coming back or they're heading, and that always just takes me back. So what, if I understand your role, your AFSC, were you working on components for the aircraft, like as it became damaged or upgrades or stuff like that?
Well, the ironic thing about the structural repair technicians, we worked on everything. I mean, we worked on certain avionics components, some hydraulic components. We did control cables. And we also worked on the airframe. If you had damaged panels, if you had damaged structure, then you would have to take and manufacture replacement pieces and, splice those into the aircraft. And so it's very interesting doing a lot of stuff. We have aircraft like F-4s would come back after a bird strike, and you'd have a bird that got ingested by an engine, and you'd have to go in and assess the damage to the intake. So you'd put on your bunny suit and make sure you didn't have anything loose, and take on your bunny suit and shimmy up by the VAR ramp and go down the intake. And of course, it's still smelling like burnt bird, and you're crawling in there to assess the damage and figuring out what you got to do to repair it. And, all that kind of stuff. So
much like the private sector, this is just my opinion here. I would love to get your take. The folks that keep aircraft going, the folks that keep fleets going, the maintenance or the engine technicians or the structural components like you're describing your role, that is one of the thankless pools of professionals probably around, whether it's in the military or on the private sector. Would you tend to agree with that?
Yeah, I would. I mean, there's a lot of difficult, challenging roles for people that are maintaining aircraft these days, and again, it's not a very glamorous job at all, and yet there are things that they have to do because the folks that are working on aircraft, again, people's lives are at stake. It's not it's not like you're going to burn somebody's burger and they're going to send it back to the kitchen or something like that. So it's a very, very structured, very disciplined community. And no, we haven't got to that part yet, and we're going to talk about transition a little bit. But I think it's one of the things, one of the fields that I think is probably one of the easiest for our transitioning military today is to go into aviation, because that similarity between structure and discipline in the military, structure and discipline in that particular environment. So.
Well put. Looking at the private sector and especially all that talented expertise that keeps, our freight moving, tractor trailers and the fleets there, whether they're on the engine or other aspects, or as you mentioned, that the air freight fleets. So the ton of that talent that keeps global supply chain moving. All right, so let's switch gears a bit. I'm looking forward to picking your brain on your transition here in a little bit, but let's talk about some of your favorite leaders that either you worked with or maybe they worked for you, or folks you worked for. When you think back of your time in the Air Force, who are some of those folks that really made an impact in your career?
Well, I'll tell you, I think that the guy that made the first impact, and I wish I could remember his name, but I can tell you that he was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. And I'll tell you what he impressed me on the most. When my first week at Chanute Air Force Base, there was an air show taking place in Rantoul, which was the city right outside of the base. And so we were in charge of cleaning up a missile display for a static display as part of the air show. Mm-hmm. So I remember this lieutenant colonel grabbing me and four or five other guys and took us out and told us what we had to do, gave us our assignment. And for me, I was kind of like Slim Pickens. Here's this missile on this platform, about a 45-degree angle. So what do? I climb up there. I shimmy up to the nose of this thing because I figure, hey, if I'm going to clean this thing, I'm going to clean it from the nose down, right? So I'm sitting up there like Slim Pickens in the movie, right? And I'm cleaning this thing. And I look down on the ground, and there's this lieutenant colonel who's got his sleeves rolled up. He's got his hand going down in the bucket with a sponge, and he's washing the wheels. Mm. And I thought, wait a minute, here's this lieutenant colonel. I'm just an airman nothing, right? Mm. Along with the other airman nothings that are there. And he could have just told us, hey, guys, get this cleaned up. I'll come back and get you. But he impressed me because it was, here's this officer knowing that we had this objective, and he was willing to go, and even in his, I mean, it wasn't full dress blues, but, you know, they wore the light blue shirt and the blue slacks and corporate shoes. But he's down there working with us, and I thought, wow, that's not servant leadership, right? And so that's one of the first guys that really impacted me. I couldn't cover all of them, but I will fast forward to another guy that really impressed me. If you don't mind, I'll mention the name. I've lost touch with him. He was Master Sergeant Joe Echternock, and he became my supervisor when I moved from my permanent station to Shaw Air Force Base to Travis Air Force Base. When I left Shaw, I had worked really hard to develop my skills, and I'd gotten up to my 7 level. I had gotten my E5 stripes, and one of the things I wanted to do when I got my E5 stripes was move to a different base, because, you know, as you work alongside with individuals and you get promoted, then sometimes you have that buddy thing. They think, oh, well, I don't have to listen to you because you were just a senior airman last year, right? So I thought it was better from a leadership position to go to somewhere new where they didn't know me. But before I left the base, because I had honed my skill so much, you know, we had our AFTO 623, which was our training record, and we always got our airman performance reports every year. Remember those? So mine at Shaw Air Force Base, everything was 9, top of the line. I thought, I'm hot stuff, right? I get out to Travis Air Force Base. I'm out there for about 6 months. It's time for my first evaluation, and all of a sudden I get my evaluation back from Joe Echternock, and he's giving me 7s and 8s, and I'm like, you jerk. What are you doing? You need to call the people at Shaw, because people at Shaw said I'm perfect. I was young then and got a little bent out of shape. So I just, I went to call him on it. And I said, hey, what is this? What is this? He said, look, he said, you're one of the best technicians I've got. But he said, I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't constantly let you know those things that you need to work on, and those things you need to be better, because none of us are perfect. We all have things. He says these guys that just basically pencil whipped your record and gave you 9s didn't give you any feedback for improvement. And so when he sat down and he explained that to me, and he said, I want you to be the best you absolutely can be, but you can't be that if I don't help coach you in those areas you need to work on. So that really resonated with me. And in fact, I carried that forward when, you know, I was in a position of having to manage a department and having to supervise individuals, and think about, you know, our responsibility to help coach, teach, train, because none of us are perfect, because we're all evolving, we're all learning, we're all growing. So Joe Echternock was really great, that he really took the time to invest in me, carried me through this day to remember that we all have some growing to do. No matter where we're at in life, we always have growing to do.
That sounds really powerful, and I bet you've applied that to countless folks that have worked for you since that time, I bet.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always, you know, attempted to encourage people. And I think one of the problems as leaders sometimes, and when we work with individuals, they're individuals, right? And every individual has unique gifts and skills. And I've learned over the years that if you have all types of people, right? You're going to have the people that are widget makers. And so if they're widget makers, you don't necessarily want to make those people supervisors of widget makers if they don't have those personal skill sets, or they don't have the empathetic skills to be able to work with and coach people. So because there are times where people in those kind of roles, they get promoted in the supervisor roles, and next thing you know, they're failing and they feel like they're a failure because they didn't survive. So I think having that ability to be able to just assess people and make the best of what they are, and encourage and coach them according to their inherent traits and skill sets is very important for a leader.
Let's talk about, when you look back on your career in the military with the Air Force, some of those accomplishments that you still kind of stir something today. And what do you look back and what are you most proud of while you served?
Well, again, I think that having just some great coaches, some great trainers, some great supervisors that really drove and inspired, that was very important. As a result of getting a number of different awards, I was able to experience things that some people couldn't. For instance, before leaving Shaw Air Force Base, just a few weeks before leaving there, I actually got what was at the time the longest check ride in the back seat of an F-4.
Really?
So yeah, they had an awards program that if you were voted what they called Airman of the Quarter, you would get a ride around the flagpole, as it used to be called. And so typically what they would do is take guys up and they would literally fly around the base one time and land again. But this one particular mission I went on, in fact, I still have the mission record. Major Kiesel was the pilot that flew us. But of course, you went through all the egress training and everything because you had to learn to operate radios and operate the ejection seats and all that. So here we go, a week before Christmas, 1981. I'm sitting in the back seat of this F4, and we taxied out and closed the canopy up, and the pilot lit those two J-79 afterburners, and away we went. So we spent 2 hours flying around. We went over South Carolina, North Carolina, Alabama, just covering a lot of territory.
Wow. What an experience. Those are, when I was in, I think they call those incentive rides. And I only got one in a KC-135. We refueled a B2 or a B1 rather. Now that's really cool to see that level of orchestration and just that immense attention to detail to have these two aircraft going whatever speed, easily, conservatively 300 miles an hour, and to have them dance so that they can transfer, of course, just jet fuel. All it is jet fuel, right. And just that it's amazing. There's a level of grace to it. So, but I would have, as much as I enjoyed that, to ride in the back of an F4 Phantom 2 for 2 hours and explore the Southeast, man, that's got to be one of those memories you'll always have.
Oh yeah, best aircraft ride ever.
And did the pilot, I think you said Major Kiesel, is that what you said?
Major Kiesel.
He was the pilot. He didn't try to get you sick, did he?
No, well, actually he did. And I had a good buddy of mine that had flown a couple of weeks for me. Again, he literally just flew around the flagpole, used both of his bags, and still left a bit of a mess in the cockpit. But yeah, he tried to do a few banks, a few turns, but I had learned early on, sometimes you just got to go with the flow, go with the ride, just relax in the seat,
right,
and go with the aircraft. So
he
actually let me fly for about 10 minutes too.
Man, that's awesome. So, incredible.
Good experience.
All right. So now let's talk about the transition. You and I both have had no shortage of conversations ever since I left, because I didn't have the easiest transition, and I didn't have a lot of the strikes against me that a lot of folks, after 18, 19 years of war have, combat vets coming back that have PTSD, and they may not have degrees, and, they've got all these challenges. I didn't have any of that, and I struggled back in '02 with my transition, and I've heard countless stories about folks that just not pointing any fingers to any, whether the military or them. It's just you struggle with that transition. So let's talk about your transition and how it went. And then I'd love to kind of also hear about what you've gathered as you've heard other transition and from other veterans and what you've shared with them to kind of coach them.
All right. For me, when I got, again, my last duty station was Travis Air Force Base. And I remember when I was getting out and I was exiting, at the time we called them the Consolidated Base Personnel Office, or CBPO. So I remember going in the CBPO office, and this was probably about 6 months before I was going to exit. And I said, look, I don't think I'm going to re-up this go around. I'm going to take an early out at 9 years, 2 months active duty. I was going to get out. And I said, what do I need to do? And so I remember a person sitting behind the desk, and he pointed to a bulletin board, and they said, well, there's a bunch of index cards and flyers up there. Go, make some calls and good luck. And that was it. That was what I was told. I went over there and I started scoping around what was on the bulletin board and happened to see a flyer for Eastern Airlines. And so, okay, here we go. So next thing I know, over the next couple of months, I'm flying first class from California to Miami, Florida on the Miami Airlines flights. Out of San Francisco. They actually flew me on 2 separate occasions, did the interviews. I'll shorten the story up. Eventually, I wound up going to work for Eastern after a couple of opportunities they put up there for me. But I went to work for them, and actually going to work from the military and aviation really wasn't a lot different, because in the military, obviously, there's that rank structure. There's the structure, the discipline, the sense of mission. It's very critical. Everything that you're doing is very important. And so going into commercial aviation, it really wasn't a lot different, because you had the same kind of requirement for structure and discipline and FAA regulations and all this. And so I found going into aviation, even though Eastern only lasted about another 5 years, finally closed its doors in '91. And then after that, I went to another aviation, working for a jet engine overhaul facility for about 12 and a half years. But all in all, going from there into that, those commercial entities like that, or to that type of work, was really no hiccups. I didn't start realizing the hiccups until, and the problems with transition that I know vets are experiencing today, until about 19 years later after getting out, when I started going into other industries not related to aviation, what I was used to. So going to work for manufacturing companies, print shops, eventually healthcare companies and whatnot. And what I started seeing was a totally different culture, a totally different dynamic, a totally different work ethic. And so for the next 12 years or so, I would, notice all the differences, all the delta, right, between what I was used to, between military and aviation history, and what was going on in all these others. And I started seeing a real disconnect and a misunderstanding that those of us who have served in the military and those that currently work in aviation, they understand the importance of structure and discipline. But it seems like a lot of other businesses lack that. Right? They lack that foundational piece because they see it as being too rigid. And so I've got some analogies I've give about having to have a foundation and how you build on top of a foundation. I won't get into it now, but basically I started really having those transitional problems once I got into other industries that somewhat mimic what I hear our veterans going through today. And that's why I feel of like taking that experience that I've gone through and say, okay, how do I use this knowledge, this experience that I've gone through, and how can I help look at seeding information in the right space and the right time within the military and civilian and veteran community to help them avoid some of those things I experienced.
Yep.
And so that's basically where we're at now.
All right. So really interesting perspective, especially because you were saying way back at the beginning of this interview about how it really helped your transition given the skill sets you were learning in the Air Force and how much applicability that I think that's the right word there was in the private sector. And that'd be a great advantage, despite the other, some of the other components of transition that outside of skill set that can still be challenging. When you talk to veterans these days here in 2020 that are maybe they're on terminal leave, or maybe they've already separated and they're still looking for a job, or whatever, wherever they are in their transitional stage, what are some of the things, what are some of the ways that you advise them and coach them?
Well, one thing is I try to get them to think in military terms, to think strategically and tactically about what they're going to do and where they're going to do it. As I present, if you think back to our military experience, our mission was whatever our service branch told us our mission was. So the military told us what we were going to do. They told us how we were going to do it, and they told us when we were going to do it, right? So you had this command and control. Well, as a military member, you get out, you're a veteran, you exit the military, there's no longer that command and control because it's just you. And so many veterans get out and they're so disconnected from a bigger sense of mission. And what I try to tell them is, look, the mission is now you and your family, your spouse and your family. That's your mission. So you have to create what that new mission looks like for you and your family. And as you create that mission for you and your family, you have to think strategically and tactically about what are the things that I need to do to put in place to be able to provide the needs and fill the gaps, whether they're educational gaps and especially with relational gaps, for you to be able to take and be successful at your new mission that you've created for yourself. So I try to get them to think in military, with a military mind.
I really like that. I like the customization element to that, to kind of building your new mission plan. It's so important, as I've learned, when it comes to transition, kind of determining what you want to do, or what company, or what type of role, or what, kind of a combination of things, and then working backwards to figure out how to get there, and what resources you need, or what you need to learn along the way. It really reminds me a lot, Don, of professional certification. We get asked a lot about, what certification should we go after? And it's, for me, it's always reverse engineering is the easiest way to figure that out. It's not easy, but it's the easiest way, right? It really helps. Before we switch over to what you're up to now and some of your big news, anything else when it comes to transition that folks should really understand, whether they're, in the military listening to this conversation, or if they're civilian employers, and they don't know what they don't know? Anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I think we need to, the word transition has really been overused, and I prefer to use the term civilian reintegration, because think about it. You and I weren't born military. We were civilian to start with.
Right.
We just decided because, and again, it goes back to the character of the individuals that are going to enlist in the military. It's people with a servant's heart, right? So, those of us that chose to go in the military to stay whatever length of time we stayed, whether it's a tour or whether it's a 20 or 30 years, it's only a portion of our overall career life. And so what I call it when I do these presentations, I call it civilian reintegration. In essence, instead of thinking in the terms of transition, and we'll talk a little bit more, may talk a little bit more about some of the other programs and veteran service organizations that are out there to help. I think military, what we need to do is we need to start earlier in the process with our military members. And it's not an either or, right? Career development needs to be happening in parallel with the military service, whether it's 4 years or 30 years, and constantly doing things to improve ourselves, to increase our knowledge, get certain certifications, build relationships, not just in the military, but outside the military, and do this in parallel. And I think, I tell people 18 months before they get out is really when they need to start making their strategic plans. The reason I say 18 months, the first 2.5 years of military service needs to be getting, proficient in your MOS, getting used to that military work ethic, all the team building, the leadership, all of those dynamics. And once that's ingrained in you and you're now this military member, whatever branch you're in, then there needs to be something done within the military to start thinking about, look, even if you're here 30 years, you're going to get out, you're going to be late 40s, right? Yep. If you stay in 30 years, you've still got another 20 or 30 years to do something, whatever that something is. So why not be building yourself to be prepared throughout your length of service so that you don't have the transitional problems we have right now?
Mm-hmm. So well put. Well put. And from what I've heard in talking with different folks, well, I've probably heard the most about the Army's change when it comes to that Soldier for Life program, some of the tweaks mm-hmm. they've made, the enhancements they've made. Mm-hmm. I'm hoping that the other branches are following suit and focusing on the post-service time frame as much as they, or at least to a certain degree, as much as they focus on while that military member is serving in uniform. But we'll see. It continues improvement. You never arrive, right? It's always a journey. Right. All right, so let's talk about what you're up to now. There's a couple of big projects that I'm aware of, and we'll touch on those here momentarily. Your big broadcast last night, and of course the book. But before we talk about those things, what do you do? How are you helping organizations right now?
We have a big communication disconnect, and you were alluding to this earlier. There's things to be taught on both sides. It's not just one-sided with the veteran and military communities, but we also need to be talking a lot more to our businesses, especially in light of what's happened in 2020. I mean, we've been faced with more challenges this year than we have probably over the last decade. But I think part of the communication problem that I believe in is that sometimes on the military side, we paint a picture that hurts us more than helps us. And I'm going to go back to something you said earlier about the PTSD issue. Again, PTSD is sometimes often seen as only a military disorder, and it's right. Not just a military disorder. And they also have to understand that not 100% of people that are in the military are in combat situations, and so therefore 100% of the military people don't suffer from PTSD. But I think sometimes the narrative is military members have PTSD, which might make a business owner think, do I want to take a chance with damaged goods? Am I going to have to worry about the stability of this individual that I'm going to bring into my workplace? So we've got to make sure that when we're talking to those business owners understand two things. One, a small percentage of military people suffer from PTSD. And fortunately, we've got a number of great programs that do help with those individuals that have suffered from that disorder, that have helped them get on the other side of that disorder, and therefore has made these people more resilient and able to identify and deal with challenging situations, which makes them a tremendous asset for businesses today that are suffering from things like the COVID-19 and the impact on business, the social unrest and its impact on business. And these military members that have gone through that and have learned to overcome, they're the best thing businesses could have right now. And so I think we have to make sure that businesses understand the full dynamic of the PTSD and not paint it as this is everybody's damaged kind of thing.
Yeah, those are really important clarifying remarks. And I'm hoping that based on what I've seen, and early anecdotal, it's really tough to really study this as an outsider, but it seems like organizations, especially those, I think of Starbucks, that have made huge commitments to hire veterans. I think of other organizations out there. It seems like we're making progress in to speak military ease or veteran ease, so that you have less language barriers and you've got a little more better understanding of some of the things you brought up. But we've got a long way to go, and we've got so many folks, whether it's just the veterans or whether it's the veterans themselves, but also their spouses and their significant others that we've got to make sure are hireable and have opportunities. So anyway, I love some of the things you touched on there, and I really appreciate your view on your transition, but also what others are experiencing now. So let's talk about this. The veteran transition experience. I did not have the opportunity to check it out live yesterday. So tell us about what this project is and why it's important to you.
Again, in this VTE, as we call it, everybody in the military loves their acronyms, and so we call it Veteran Transition Experience. And again, it's really a misnomer because, like I said, we were civilian, then military, and civilian again. So it's really a reintegration. Basically, Scott, over the last couple of years, listening to all of these different veteran stories and hearing all these veterans saying that a certain program let them down, or they felt like they didn't get anything out of the program, or they were struggling, they weren't able to find, they weren't able to connect, they weren't able to, figure out really what it was they wanted to do. So many veterans coming out and going to colleges and getting a degree and then working in something totally unrelated to their degree. And you look at some of the statistics we see today. We see 10% of veterans homeless. Somebody that served their country. And again, it's not all from necessarily job loss. Unfortunately, we have some other things that add to the homeless thing. But it's ridiculous that we have 10% of our veterans getting out and not having a home to go to. We got 22 veteran suicides happening every day. We know we've got that dynamic going on, and a number of those happen because of financial struggles and the pressures of the people that can't handle it on the outside. They're not prepared to deal with the nuances of civilian life outside of the military. You've got, recently there was a report, 50% of military members felt like they and their spouses, they and their families did not have enough support in their transition process, which is ridiculous considering we have almost 40,000 veteran service organizations across the country to help them. And so that didn't make sense. And then the other part of the dynamic was you've got 70% of veterans that once they do transition out, they do get into a job, within about 2 years, they're leaving that job because they're dissatisfied, disgruntled. And I want to go back something, I'm going to back up a little bit to something you said earlier about the business side. I think what we have to teach businesses, and one of the things I tell business leaders is, if you as a business are hiring veterans and are planning to bring veterans in and you want them to blend into your culture, that's a death sentence for you. And I'll tell you why. If you have a culture that is complacent, that is not advancing, that's not growing, that's not learning, that's not expanding that culture dynamic, then what's happening, I think, a lot of these military members that go into a business that bring in that stronger work ethic, that sense of team, that sense of mission and everything else, it's being drowned out because many businesses just want them to go with the status quo, just blend into the culture rather than taking full advantage of these military traits and these military skills that can help basically move the chains and help evolve the business culture to what it needs to be with the times. And so, I encourage any business, when you hire a veteran, when you onboard a vet, don't just let them get lost in the mix. Take full advantage of what they bring to the table because they will help your business grow in ways that you cannot imagine.
The Veteran Transition Experience, is this a program that you'll continue to be leading? Should we go further about how folks can plug in there?
Yeah, basically with the Veteran Transition Experience, my objective is to grow this and get this to the point that we can start making this maybe an add-on to some of the existing programs that the military is doing. We really want to get to the military community. So if we can help TAP, Soldier for Life, or whatever, and just take this content, take this information. And again, I'm not out there, this is not a new veteran service organization, it's not a new nonprofit, this is just strictly what I see, what I've seen, what I've heard, what I've experienced. I see a way to close some of those communication gaps and some of those things we need to fill in communication to make it better for vets.
To supplement what's out there and to make it more effective is what I'm hearing.
Right.
Especially
Absolutely.
based on your background, both being a veteran and a business leader. It sounds like, and this is just my interpretation, you're seeing these gaps, you're seeing these phases or spaces of the transition experience that can be improved. And it sounds like you're offering some really neat tools to supplement and enhance and optimize this critical part of a veteran's journey, right?
Right. And as you mentioned earlier, and I want to make sure that people understand, this is not just about the military member, because we don't want to forget the spouses. We don't want to forget the kids, and especially those that might have older children that have been, military brats or whatever they call them these days, but, gone through that military experience. You can't disconnect the family from the military member. We want to treat not just the military member, but the family as a whole unit. So we offer this up to anybody, military, spouse, individuals that are old enough to start thinking about career development and planning, 16, 17, 18 years old, as a military family member. Hey, we want to have you participate in this. We want to help you. We want to make sure you've got the right resources, that you're connected, you're plugged in, and doing the things you need to do as part of your lifelong learning.
Love it. All right. So before we talk about the book, how can folks, will you be doing this digitally and then in person as we get back to whatever this new normal we're getting into? How can folks plug into it?
Well, ultimately, obviously, because of COVID, we have to do this virtual for a while. So we're looking the next couple of months of doing this virtually through a studio, through Zoom. We can gather a few people in the studio, but we're very limited in that regard. The hope is to eventually take this content, take this program, and do a train-the-trainer with it. We've got a lot of great people out there coaching and mentoring with a number of organizations. So we can give them this as a tool. If they can take this tool and go out and engage members of the military community at bases all over the country, and they can start doing that. Or if some of the existing military programs that are out there, Soldier for Life, TAPS, or whatever, if they want to have us, give them what we're giving as content material to add to that at an earlier stage, this is all being given away for free. So this is just more of a philanthropic effort to take that experience, because again, some of the feedback I've gotten is military members are being told by other military members how to prep for civilian life. So how can somebody in the military who doesn't have civilian experience tell another military member how to prep for civilian life? So I think it's incumbent upon us to have those decades or years of experience to go back and say, here's what I've discovered so that you don't have these problems. Here's what you can do, so that when you get to the point I got to when I got out, you don't have those struggles, you don't have those challenges. And that's what we want to do. We need to go back. We need to plant those seeds. We need to help those individuals out.
I love it. I love deeds, not words. One of my good old buddy, John Phillips, he's really ingrained that in my ears. And I'm not sure, I always attribute it back to John. I'm sure there's different versions of that, but it's just such a beautiful, cuts through all the noise. And Don, you're doing it. I mean, that it takes action. It takes a lot of hard work and heavy lifting, but there's such a huge need, and I appreciate your approach with that program. Okay, let's talk about this book. I'm going to get 10 copies on my way. I haven't read it yet, and that's shame on me, but I will, because I know you've gotten a lot of great feedback from folks that have gotten a lot out of it. From the Inside Out, Plotting the Course of Our Personal and Professional Life, which is available on Amazon, by the way. I found it there. Tell us about what called you to write this book, and what's it about?
Well, yeah, it started, actually, this is a very old writing, very old manuscript. I actually started writing this about 15, 16 years ago. And what inspired me to do that is as I, again, got out of that transition from working in aviation and started seeing some of these other business dynamics, and I started thinking about my own, personal struggles and things that didn't work and things that did work, and started reflecting about how much is inside of us, right? That there are things that happen outside of us that we can allow to let them affect us in a negative way, or we can look internally and say, okay, how can I take and look at this a different way, look at it a different perspective? For instance, one of the things that I talk about is that it's how we choose to deal with the situation. We ultimately have the decision-making power as to let it stop us or to find a way to work around it. And so as I put these thoughts in there, I thought, okay, let me start jotting down. So I just started writing some some more like diary notes, and then that went to memoirs, and then next thing you know, I'm writing an outline for chapters. And I thought, well, I want this to just be a quick read, a quick reflective, look in the mirror, look at yourself, look at who you are, think about how you can be in the driver's seat. You have the ability to either be in the driver's seat or let somebody else drive for you. Mm. And so I'm hoping that with this book that it'll give people an opportunity to put them in the driver's seat, to really look at things from somebody else's perspective. Two of the things that I love. I love Steve Covey, what he said, begin with the end in mind and seek first to understand, right? So too many times, and I think this is what happens with our social culture, is we really don't think enough about putting ourselves in the other person's shoes. Mm. We're in this battle because people are talking in absolutes, and so the discussion of absolutes is keeping us polarized. But if we took the time to just listen and think about, what if I could put myself in that person? What if I could see it from their perspective? If I saw it from their perspective and looked back at myself, then I would realize that, hey, I'm the one that needs to make the change. I'm the one that needs to be different. I need to change my thought patterns. And so I'm hopeful that this book will do that for a number of people.
I, for one, think you're absolutely right. And about this polar opposites. And, I had a buddy of mine that I served in that had made a big impact on my life, Troy Boozer. He's now in the ministry doing big things, literally doing the Lord's work. And we were talking here in recent months, given these these challenging times we live in. And he made it real, it's not us versus them. There are so many people involved. It's not just two sides of the table. And there's some nuances to any argument. It's not an alpha and bravo. It's not just binary. And so I really believe that's an important comment you were just making there, because I think if we realize that and embrace that and try to find that common ground that exists oftentimes, even with the two polar opposite individuals, they can still find some common ground, especially if they just apply a little bit of empathy, which we all need a lot more of that these days. But great commentary. I think it's got to be a great read. You've gotten a lot of feedback from folks that have read it, and it's made a mark in their journeys, right?
Yeah, it has. I've had people read it and tell me, that they would think differently now about things that had impacted them one way, and they held on to this certain belief. It's not in this book. I'll give you a kind of a preview of coming attractions, but another piece that I'm working on, I use the analogy of watching a movie all the way through and then seeing it for the second time, and then seeing a scene or hearing a dialogue that you didn't hear the first time around, and it changes your perspective on the movie. Mm. Well, guess what? Our life is the exact same way, because we have a certain thing, but once we introduce new information to that, it can take us back to 20, 30 years ago of something that happened that changes our whole perspective on it. A personal thing for me is my father. My father passed when I was very young, 70 years old, had a massive heart attack. I knew he hadn't lived a perfect life, and I wondered about, quite frankly, I wondered about his salvation. I didn't know. 20 years, I wondered, what about my dad? I knew about his life, and he wasn't a perfect man, but then again, none of us are. But I love my father. But 20 years later, I found out that when he was found, he had a little pocket Bible in his shirt pocket, in his work shirt pocket, and he had cross in my pocket in his wallet that he carried with him. And so it made me realize, hey, my dad did believe. He was a believer and all that. Again, it didn't change anything about him being perfect, but all of that I wondered for over 20 years about my dad, once I found out that new information, it totally changed the dynamic of still missing my father, but just thinking of him in a different way. So that
is a compelling way of putting it. And I was about to share an example, but I'm not. After you shared that, it sounds tedious. That's such some powerful perspective there, Don. So what I heard you say is stay tuned, because you've got more books coming out, more books up, other projects up your sleeve. All right. So before we wrap up here, make sure folks know how to get in touch with you. I want to kind of just go broader here. And when you look at global business, we've talked about all kinds of things in this pretty wide ranging interview, all pretty much tied back to service and the veteran community and whatnot, veteran journey. When you look at the global business environment right now, what's one thing that sticks out that really has got your attention?
From a global perspective, I think, and again, you've seen this, you folks talk about this in supply chain a lot. You know, we have gone businesses over the years, and one of the reasons textiles doesn't exist in Bessemer City, North Carolina anymore is all the offshore, right? Let's do it cheaper somewhere else. Let's pay somebody a buck a day to produce this rather than paying minimum wage here, and let's offshore. And so a lot of businesses have left, and so you have supply chains that have, you know, businesses have gone to rely on a single source provider, the cheapest single source provider. Boom, COVID-19 hits, areas of the globe get cut off. Now you can no longer get those products. You can't get those raw goods. You can't get those services, whatever it is, it's shut off. And I think globally, with what COVID has done for us this year, has made us realize we can't, as the old adage goes, put all our eggs in one basket. We've got to develop multiple supply chains. We got to leverage our technology. We've got to change a lot of things, especially when you look at our infrastructure, our nation's infrastructure. It is so outdated. Think about just the nature of a tractor trailer truck and how we use tractor trailer trucks to move products across the country. And then fast forward, I've already been thinking about this. Elon Musk is one of those great visionaries, right? Right. We already see what he's done with SpaceX over the past 19 years. You know, reusable rockets. It looks like a 1950s B movie. Boca Chica, Texas, down there around Brownsville. He's building a new spaceport. He's got all those things going on. He's got the Hyperloop. Okay, think about the implications of the Hyperloop and how that could move goods across the country, like the old bank thing, right? Or the old bank thing that used to use it to drive through at the bank thing. Yeah. Imagine using those things instead of tractor trailer trucks to move goods and services across the country. So we've got that sort of thing. So I think the introduction of new technology, I know Greg is big on robotics and stuff like this to help supplement the workforce because we don't have 800 million workers like China does. Right. And just to clarify, Don's talking about Greg White, co-host extraordinaire on Supply Chain Now, a related program here. But yeah. So I've got to put a plug in for Greg somewhere. But, you know, Greg White talks about the robotics. But I think all of this other technology that we can bring to bear to help that supply chain and moving goods and services, especially when, you know, you have these disruption as he talks about, but being able to change gears and switch gears and move product to and from a lot faster than, I mean, trucking's just really, we rely on it so heavily, but it's time for it to be upgraded, right, with the technology that we have. So I see a lot of changes happening in that regards, multiple sources for multiple pipelines for businesses, and don't rely on just one, because if one gets shut down, then it's easier to go to another supplier and just ramp up production there. Those kinds of things are going to change. Not displacing employees. It's great that we have all the AI talk that we have and technology and robotics and stuff like that, but if we think that the objective is to replace human workers, it should be to help enhance the human work experience. And so we have to get businesses to stop laying people off and think of ways to re-employ those same people into other parts of the business. And that's another thing I try to talk about, because once you create efficiencies and you start laying off people, you set up the stage where people are no longer engaged in your business because they wonder, I'm next, right? They're thinking I'm next. So going back to the infrastructure, I think that's a great point. I'm going to get this wrong, and I'm probably going to hear about it, but it's something like the American Association of Civil Engineers. It's some kind of a association like that to represent that profession. And they come out with a scorecard every couple of years, I think every 2 years, that rates the U.S.'s infrastructure. And I think I'm almost positive we got a D+ on the last report card. I'm surprised it's that high. Yeah, really. And it's such a, you know, the bridges and the water systems and some of the highways and byways that of course furthers supply chain, but just life here in the States.
We've got some big challenges there. So that's great perspective there. And it's a good note to kind of, not necessarily an uplifting note to wrap up on, but a good one and an important one. Here's a better note to wrap up on. So Don, I bet you're going to find some folks that want to get in touch with you and plug in, support some of the things you're doing, or check out, your book, or maybe even get some advice on their upcoming, what'd you call it? Civilian reintegration.
Civilian reintegration.
Yeah, that's a few extra. Those extra syllables are above my pay grade, but I'll get it down next time we chat. Civilian reintegration. So, how can folks get in touch with you, Don?
Well, they can either look me up on LinkedIn, Don Edward Long on LinkedIn. They can go to my website, www.longinsights with an S, LLC.com, or pick up the phone. It's the best way to get a hold of me, 770-377-4569.
It's so just that easy.
Just that easy. I try to help wherever I can, however I can. I don't know everything, but I can do a couple of things. Hey, we got to get you on the mountain hike too, you and Greg.
I forgot to ask you about that because I've really enjoyed that. And to our listeners, if you haven't seen it, it's just a hike.
It's only a mountain, and I got to tell you, I will not take credit for another man's work. And I've got to tell you, when it comes to mentoring and coaching, you don't necessarily have to have an older individual to help mentor or coach you. Remember that. Younger people can coach us. Okay?
That's right.
I've got a great friend, Jason Smith. I'm going to put in a shameless plug for Jason Smith. He was the reason I got this published. He found out about my writing, and he says, "Why didn't you publish it?" And I said, "Well, just because I'm not, I don't know if it's that good or anything." He said, just publish it, get it out there, so you can do it. And so, he gave me a kick in the rear end, which is what I needed, and I got that published out there. So anyway, he and I also realized, look, in the age of COVID and everybody sitting at home and packing on the extra pounds and not staying in good shape and everything because of all the virtual stuff, hey, let's get out and let's go exercise and stuff like that. So we decided to do Kennesaw Mountain. We get up there to the top on this one day, and we're feeling good. We're feeling charged up. And Jason made the comment. He said, "It's only a mountain." And it's like, yeah, that's right. It's only a mountain. And so is life, So is life.
And it's stuck. So like once a week. So and it seems like you've got a big group some days that folks are joining your gauntlet you're throwing down. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I love it. I love the vibe. I love the sense of community. Our dear friend Kathy Morrow Robertson has been up with you at least once.
Yeah, she went with us. She was worried about whether or not she was going to be able to keep up, but she's got to understand, we took our time and we paced it according to the younger person. Now, they're always having to slow me down because I'm the kind of, I want to get to the top. Let's get this over with. Let's get this done. But anyway, we leave nobody behind.
Love it. I love all this stuff you're up to that helps others and gets folks involved and helps build that sense of community. So to our audience, be sure to check out. We're going to make it really easy beyond what Don has shared here. We're going to include in the show notes ways you can plug in and connect with Don separately. So big thanks to Don Edward Long, founder and president at Long Insights LLC. We'll be back in touch soon.
Thanks, Scott.
You bet. All right. So to our audience, what a great conversation. I mean, I'm always partial, but I've really enjoyed Don's perspective he shared. So many different takeaways, so many different T-shirt isms, I think, from this conversation that I'm going to be thinking about in the days to come. But on behalf of the entire team here at Veteran Voices, we invite you to find us and subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. You can also find us on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn in particular. And if you're a veteran with a special story to tell, reach out, let us know. We'll try to get you on an upcoming show. In the meantime, this is Scott Luton wishing all of you, all of our listeners, nothing but the best. Hey, do good, give forward, be the change that's needed. And on that note, we'll see you next time here on Veteran Voices. Thanks, everybody.